Hi, my name's Kevin Ring. I'm president of FAM. Thanks for joining us. We're trying to have these every week while we are going through this COVID-inspired craze in our prisons. Today, we wanted to focus in on federal compassionate release, and I'm really grateful that I'm joined by Matthew Charles, who is not only the first beneficiary of the First Step Act, but he also works with FAM as a criminal justice reform fellow. We're also joined by Bernie Kerik, who was the NYPD police chief during 9/11. He also was the corrections commissioner. He knows a lot about corrections and about law enforcement, and we're grateful for him being here. Many of you may know that Bernie and Matthew sent a letter to the White House on April 9th, in which they urged the administration to use compassionate release more as a way to get vulnerable people out of federal prison. There's been a lot of focus on home confinement, and that is a good tool that the Attorney General has utilized, that Congress gave him expanded authority to use. But compassionate release is another tool that would allow the Bureau of Prisons to get people who are vulnerable and at risk of COVID out of the prisons. It's been underutilized. In fact, what we have found is that the Bureau has not allowed people to apply for it in many cases. They have not accepted the requests that have been made by people inside prison or their families. When the families have proceeded to court after waiting the requisite 30 days to get an answer, or if they don't get an answer, the Justice Department has opposed those petitions in court. And so it feels like the Justice Department is fighting this battle with one hand tied behind its back. In one sense, it's using home confinement authority to move people out, which is smart, but its criteria for moving them is a little bit limited. And so the other tool that they have at its disposal, this federal compassionate release, they're not using, and in some cases downright opposing. So I am grateful that these two gentlemen are here, because I think the letter they sent to the White House was right on the money. I'll mention that they sent it April 9th, and at that time, there had been 253 federal prisoners and 85 BOP staff that had tested positive. That number has more than doubled. For prisoners, we have 566 as of yesterday who have tested positive, 342 staff, and there's been 24 deaths. So it seems that time is of the essence, and the Bureau needs to be using all of its authority. And so I want to talk to you guys about this. I also know that we're going to talk about home confinement, because we've just had this complete disaster where the Justice Department and the Bureau of Prisons were not on the same page about eligibility. And the Bureau started bringing people into quarantine to start moving them out. And then they yanked about 200 people out of quarantine and said, you no longer qualify because you haven't served 50% of your sentence. And then we raised the stink about that with your help. And then the Justice Department said, no, those are guidelines. Those aren't hard and fast requirements. And so you can go back to doing that. And now we have to see how this gets implemented. So I know that's caused a lot of heartache and concern for families. And it was obviously just completely cruel and unnecessary. So we're hoping that gets addressed. We're going to rely on your help for letting us know if people do get this addressed. But I do want to start with compassionate release. And I'll start with you, Bernie. Why do you think that compassionate release is a tool that should be used, or that can be a solution to this crisis? Oh, unmute your mic. Same with you, Matthew.
I think primarily, you have people in prison that are of an age where they're not a threat to society, where they have no violence in their background. Many of them are first-time offenders. Many of them serve no real purpose. For anybody that's been in prison, or anybody that understands the concept of what really goes on in prison, they do nothing. They sit around, they languish. There's depression, there's despair, and especially when they're older or they're sick, there's no need to be there. And if they were, it's all a matter of a minor assessment. That's all that has to be done. They can be assessed medically. They can be assessed for possible recidivism. Once those two issues are cleared by the government, if they're done right, then they should be home. You have to keep in mind, especially in the lower classifications, minimum and low security, especially in a minimum security camp. It's an honor system, right? There's no security in a camp. There's no gates. There's no locks on the windows. The doors are open. You can basically walk away anytime you want it. Why not get the system, make them less vulnerable, send them home, put them on an ankle bracelet, let them live their life with dignity with their families, especially those that are critically ill. And that's what I think should be done.
Well, Bernie, what about, you know what the argument is, and you're a law and order guy, did the crime do the time? I mean, why should you get a break just for being old?
Yeah, but here's the problem. I can sit on this topic for about 2 days, so I'll shorten it up basically. You know what? The deprivation of freedom is far more profound than anybody can imagine. And as I've been with you on a number of occasions talking to the Congress and different legislators, you know what? You think it's easy in prison? They've done their time. People say a minimum security camp or a low is a slap on the wrist. Well, my answer to that is lock yourself in a granite gold-filled bathroom for a year and come out and tell me how luxurious it is. Mm-hmm. It's not. Yeah. You live in an environment that's filthy. You live in an environment that's not taken care of by the staff. I can go on this topic for a year. The bottom line is get them out of the system. It's safer. It's an alternative sentencing mechanism that, states all over the United States and primarily look at Texas. Texas has a lower crime rate than they had in years. They have lower prison populations than they had in years because they're implementing these kinds of programs. That's what they should be doing in the federal system.
Matthew, you were a guest of the Bureau of Prisons for 21 years. I'm sure you saw a lot of people you thought didn't need to be there. And so can you talk about that and how that relates to compassionate release and how we should be thinking about this issue about elderly and sick people being in federal prison?
During my period of incarceration, I actually met a lot of people, as you state, that should not have been there or should not have still been there. We understand why they're there. That's the reason I always try to remind people about the truth in sentencing laws, the over-incarceration for minor offenses or low-level offenses. And because of the overcrowding, once we ran into this pandemic that we now are facing, it has got people stating that, okay, we need to start implementing these different type of rules, such as social distancing. Well, in a prison environment, and I was in all the custodies besides a minimum camp, and as Bernard has stated a few minutes ago, camps don't actually have gates around them, so the people are just being model citizens inside of a perimeter, but they can leave it anytime they want. But in the different custody levels that I was in, I was able to see that even when I was in the USP, we had 2 or 3 men dorms. And you got to remember back in the 1980s, there was a prison population of a little bit over 25,000. I'm talking about in the federal system. Mm-hmm. Today, it has ballooned, sometimes exceeding 200,000, and at the moment, 175,000. But at the same token, it is because we have held fast to some laws that have been applied where it doesn't allow the people to receive any award for rehabilitation. And because of that, now we have the overcrowding system. So now that this pandemic is here, we're saying that we need to get some people out, and rightfully so, because there are so many people that have aged out. In other words, they've been in for 20 or 30 years, and sad to say, some of them have been given a life sentence for nonviolent offenses. Well, those people are still stuck in limbo. And even though we're considering home confinement and compassionate release, those people are still stuck in limbo because they have a life sentence, which means they have no release date. Their release date is their expiration date when they die. Yeah. But to me, there's more tools in the shed that could be used. That's the reason we're saying compassionate release should be used along with home confinement. Just like when we address criminal justice reform, we look at it from ways that what best can get the job done immediately. And we know that right now we want to save lives. As we already alluded to in our earlier conversations, we know that prisons are a hotbed for a pandemic disaster. Mm-hmm. There's no such thing as social distancing. When I was in the low facilities, we were in like cubicles. I slept one way, and even though there was somebody sleeping in a opposite direction, my head was literally on that cubicle, I would say 4 or 5 feet, not 6 feet, 4 or 5 feet from the next person's head. Now I understand that they're ordering them to sleep in opposite directions now, but at the same token, they're still breathing in the same atmosphere, and they're still sharing a communal bathroom, a communal kitchen, because they're locking them in places that have cubicles in that individual unit. So therefore, unless you mandate that they stay in their cubicle, unless they go to the restroom or the bathroom, and when they go to the bathroom, they're touching the same appliances, the same sink, the same shower. So it's just, in my mind's eye, there's a lot of people that shouldn't be there. And now that this pandemic is hit, it is really showing that they necessarily shouldn't be there, because we're considering that a person will serve 50% of their sentence. We hope it's below that. You stated that you was going to share some information with us a little bit on what, the DOJ is hearing from the BOPR, vice versa. But we know that a person that has served that significant portion of their sentence for a nonviolent offense should not have been there. And I'm gonna be honest with you, Kevin. I mean, if I was there and I wanted to live, because if I was there, I wouldn't be allowed to receive home confinement or compassionate release because of my past and because of my sentence.
Yes.
Because I had violence in my past. So that disqualifies some people, even though it has nothing at all to do with your instant offense. So if I was there, and I consider myself a good guy, but I would say the safest place, but I would say the safest place for me is in solitary confinement. So therefore, I would have to foolishly try to do something to get placed in SHU. And even in SHU, you still have interaction with the staff. And
Matthew, I want to say,
you still have
let me jump in on this.
Okay.
Because this is totally important. I think I want people to understand this. That under the home confinement rules as they're being enforced, and even some of the dumber ones about you have to have a clean disciplinary record for the past 12 months. Now, I understand why that might be important if somebody was getting in fights or doing something really serious. But I mean, stealing the egg from the chow hall or something and getting yourself a shot, and now you're disqualified from home confinement is ridiculous. But even besides those minor rules, based on your sentence and probably your pattern score, your risk assessment score, and because you had violence in your past, there's no doubt that somebody like you wouldn't qualify under these rules. And yet, I'm not saying you're old, Matthew, but you're not 30 anymore. And you're in good shape, but you're clearly somebody who, if you were trying to thin out the prison population and get people who are not likely to reoffend out, you would want you out of there. And yet under this, memo or this directive from the Attorney General, you wouldn't be. And that's another reason why I think the compassionate release is so important, is because it's going to preclude too many people. So either one of you want to react to that.
Yeah, Kevin, if I can, I just want to stress something, and it touches on what Matthew was just saying. And I think this is an education process, not for the people listening, but for more so for them to try to educate the legislators. I think this is pretty much public knowledge by now. My mother passed away as a result of the virus. She died last Saturday. I buried her yesterday. She was in a nursing home. And if anyone has followed what's going on in nursing homes around the country, in almost every state right now, you have legislators going berserk, trying to create some kind of accountability for nursing homes where the virus has spread and is spreading and getting far worse. So to touch on Matthew's comments, my mother was in a nursing home, but you know what? Everybody's scared to death talking all this garbage. It's not garbage, talking all this stuff about nursing homes. You know what? There is none. I don't care how you try to manipulate the facts. There's no social distancing in prison. Nobody's giving you a bunch of sanitizer to do the things that the CDC recommends you should be doing. Prisoners aren't being given masks or gloves. Most of the staff themselves don't have PPE. You already live in an environment where you have to worry about HIV and staph infection and MRSA and everything else. The pandemic, is pretty much, and I hate to put it in these words, it's a death trap. It's literally a death trap if they don't do the right thing, because even if they have an area secluded, they still have staff that leave the building, go out into the public, and come back to work that could be a carrier of the virus. And I can promise you, they're not taking their temperature every day, and they're not checking them when they come through the door. So at the end of the day, I think, Justice Kennedy said many years ago in a speech in 2003, that people don't understand when those prison doors close, nobody really pays any attention to what goes on behind them. I think this is an educational thing for the legislators. And I'll end my comments with this. I was in Cumberland, Maryland for 3 years. I was in a minimum security camp. Not once, not one time ever, did I see a member of the judiciary or a member of the House or the Senate come into that minimum security camp. They were only an hour and a half away in Washington, D.C. Never did I see anybody come through to see what was going on, to see the realities of prison, to look and see, why are you here? What was your indictment? What was your conviction? And what do you do all day long?
Right.
I think the legislators have to be educated. And I think the families, thank God for FAM and organizations like yours, because without you, there would be nobody fighting Congress. And I think the families really have to get more involved to get the legislators on board and educate them as to what's going on.
Well, I appreciate that. First of all, I want to say condolences to you on your mother. I wasn't sure if you were going to bring that up, but we were really sorry to hear that, and grateful to you that you still went ahead and joined us. I want to just quickly say, if anyone's watching, they always ask us, how can I get involved? First thing, please text FAM to 21333, FAM, FAMM to 21333, and start getting our information. Our COVID resources page on our website has tons of ways to take action. In fact, today we just started a new campaign for people to call the Justice Department and let them know to either keep them safe or send them home. It's a simple message. And I think most families, that's how they feel. They know not everyone's going to be able to come home because of this, but they want to know that their loved one's is being kept safely. They're in the custody and care of the government. There's nothing they can do for them. A lot of what we're hearing about is a lack of transparency, which you guys know about. People are being taken to the hospital and the family isn't notified. We had a family where their loved one was on a ventilator. They didn't get any information because the hospital couldn't reach out to the family. And so they would have to get the information from the chaplain whenever he had a chance to talk to the hospital and then relay that information. So it makes this scary time even scarier because they can't talk to them. They're in lockdown. So in one hand, they get free phone calls thanks to the CARES Act, but then they're only out of their cells for an hour a day, if that, and they have to shower and make their phone calls and emails during that time. So communications are getting, diminished at a time where people are really frightened. And when they don't hear from their loved one, and then at 3 o'clock, they go look at the website to see how many more positive tests there are, all of this is contributing to a lot of concern and fear. And what I'm concerned about is then the BOP goes and exacerbates that with this whole debacle with home confinement. And let me just address this quickly, and then we'll get to questions, which is BOP, had home confinement authority. It used to be 10% of your sentence or 6 months, whichever was less. Congress in the CARES Act gave the Attorney General the power to invoke emergency procedures so that he could give more home confinement than those time amounts. He set out a directive with criteria that the BOP should use to judge who should get it. Obviously, things like being vulnerable to the disease, being older, and then also risk factors would matter. And then what happened was they were litigating a case, and even though they were trying to give priority to people who were towards the end of their sentence, they took posture in a case that only people who had served 50% of their case, of their sentence, could benefit. So then once they took that position, BOP saw the Justice Department take that position, and they thought, 50% is a hard and fast rule. So they had moved a bunch of people to quarantine on their way to home confinement, telling them, you can get out of here in 2 weeks. They called their family members, said, come pick me up. They sent them to quarantine, and then they saw this 50% filing. They ripped everybody out and said, sorry, we put you there prematurely. You can't go unless you have served at least 50%. So a bunch of us raised a fuss about that. There have been meetings, and just today, the Justice Department now has issued another clarifying memo that said priority is going to go to those who have served 50% of their sentence, or if you're at 20 months or less, if you've served 20% of your 25% of your sentence. But that's not a hard and fast rule. BOP continues to have discretion to give people who don't meet those standards, if they are, extreme in other circumstances. So for instance, if you're very vulnerable, if you're older and sick, it may be the case that if you've served 45% of your sentence or 40%, you're okay, you're still going to get approved. But this whole, it's just incompetence on top of miscommunication, on top of cruelty. I mean, I don't know how to say it, but they've just caused such unwarranted panic among families who just want to know. Again, they want their loved ones home, but if they're not going to come home, they at least want to know what the rules are and what the standards are. And this back and forth has caused a lot of concern. Matthew, you want to talk about that?
I mean, when it comes to the Bureau of Prisons, like you stated, I did over 21 years in their custody. I know that they always give a very narrow reading or interpretation of whatever is handed down to them. So this is their, normal, way of doing things. So to see that they interpret it to mean a straight 50%, nothing below that, that's not hard for, like I said, for me to believe, because my thing is that every time that they've given a directive to do something, whether it came from the legislators or courts, whenever you appeal, because I did legal work when I was in there, when you appeal some of their rules or whatever through the BP 8, 9, and go up through 11, they always come back with something differently, even if it contradicts their own rule. But the thing about it is now that the DOJ is giving them instructions that, hey, we want those same people that you moved to quarantine to be the first people, or it should be the first people that are released, because we have already, got them in the area and got them ready to be released, and their families been notified. The probation officers, our parole officers have consulted with the family members to make sure they actually have a place to return to. So hopefully the BOP does start to do better. But my whole thing, and some of my previous posts as well, has always been that the DOJ and Congress, since Congress has to change the laws that apply to federal prisoners, would monitor him or have some type of oversight, because the BOP has always been an entity within itself. To me, they've been like untouchable for several reasons. But at the same token, we just need to make sure that we get this right, because as you stated, the longer that people are in those vulnerable situations, the fact is that they got to go through the quarantine situation again, but also they coming back around those people in the population that may be carriers of it, whether they realize it or not. But like I said, overall, I just think that the BOP, for over 21 years that I've been incarcerated, is known for doing things like that. And I just wish that it would get better. The sad part is that they're actually overseeing over 150,000 incarcerated people. And whenever you give them supervision, that type of supervision with no oversight, I mean, especially since they've been shown that they don't actually need to be entrusted with these people without oversight. So therefore, I just feel that some oversight needs to be done on a different level. And it's always been my cry to the White House administration to not leave anything to the Bureau of Prisons, even when it came to them developing the risk assessment tool or the First Step Act.
Yeah, fam, we have a prison oversight bill that we're pushing. They need independent oversight. I know you know that. You just can't, the fox can't watch the hen house. When you don't have any sunlight, you have a lot of crime. It just, even if it's not intentional, just people aren't going to behave unless they know they're going to be overseen. I just want to say, because the questions are pouring in, we should get to them, but the first thing people are asking is for further clarification on the memo. So I just want to say, if you have not gotten the memo yet, go to our webpage. It's there at fam.org. Go to our COVID resources page, or follow me on Twitter at Kevin A. Ring. I've posted it. The memo lays out the criteria that most people know by now. Things like their history in the institution, having a release plan, their primary offense, not including violence or sex offense, not having a detainer, being in a lower security level prison, those types of things. So those are the criteria that have been around since the beginning. Those haven't changed. The only thing that changed in these last few days was the amount of time you served. BOP has used 50% as a benchmark. And this makes some sense. If you were trying to clean out the prison population and do it in the safest way possible, you'd go for the vulnerable people who are most susceptible to COVID-19. So you could do that through home confinement or compassionate release. Or what they're trying to do is what a lot of states are doing is go to the bottom, people who are close to the end of their sentences, or people who are low risk, and people who politically, frankly, because there's not violent, nonviolent distinction doesn't always make sense, but politically they're trying to get people who had nonviolent offenses are at the end of their sentence. So that usually means you have served at least 50% of your sentence. I know a lot of families think, well, if my loved one's at risk, whether they've served 30% or 20%, I totally get that. This is just a priority order of releasing people. I think if some places it spreads fast, you're going to see the criteria change to keep up with the pace at which they need to release them. But as an initial matter, as they set priorities for how to release people in what order, they're going for vulnerable people who are currently vulnerable, and then they're going for people who are at the end of their sentences or had short sentences anyway. So that's what that criteria was about. The problem is when the Justice Department in litigation said that somebody wasn't going to be released because they hadn't served 50% of their sentence, they acted as if that was a hard and fast requirement. So then the Bureau of Prisons, apparently, there was miscommunication, and they took that to mean they shouldn't send anybody out who hadn't served 50%. And they had already cleared a bunch of people. So they yanked them out, and now those people are stuck. Now, Matthew just said something that I want to reiterate, which is in our discussions with the White House and the Justice Department, even though it's not in this memo, the understanding that was reached was that those who had been yanked out, who had been approved for home confinement and were already going through that process, they are supposed to be contacted again by their institutions, and they are supposed to be cleared to leave soon. Now, I say that because we won't know if that's happening unless you tell us, because we're not, you're the ones who told us there was a problem, and you're the ones who are going to need to tell us if that happens. This is the intention that the Justice Department has for the Bureau of Prisons to execute. Whether they do that, we'll have to see, and we'll have to keep them honest. But I know that the meeting of the minds between the White House and the Justice Department was that those people who got screwed over, frankly, are going to be, put back at the top of the line. Now, do they have to go back to quarantine? My understanding is, and it's in the memo, you don't have to quarantine them at the prison. Some prisons don't have place to do that. So you should be allowed to quarantine at home as long as you have a home where you can go do that. So that's one thing. Another thing, people had questions about whether people were going to be expected to go back to prison after their period of home confinement, or if they received a furlough. Again, the understanding that we have from these sources is they're not expected to go back. So again, all we can tell you is what they're saying. I know there's a lot of skepticism. I share it, but the idea is there was a terrible screw up here, and those people who were harmed by this should be addressed. Now, some people said that their loved one was told they were eligible for home confinement, but they weren't in the process yet. They hadn't gone to quarantine, all the rest. I don't know what's going to happen to those people just yet. We'll try to figure that out. I just know that the people who had been sent to quarantine or were supposed to be leaving that day and were pulled back, those people are supposed to go to the top of the line. And so that's what we want to make sure you tell us if that happens. Again, I always want to say this. If you have any questions, please drop them in the comments here, because anything we don't answer here, our staff will answer. And some of our staff should be in the comments right now answering those. I'm going to start getting to some of these questions right now. How does the elderly offender pilot program work? If you have been approved for the 2/3 reduction in sentence, did the work off that number? Elderly offender pilot detention is now not a pilot program. It's a program for people who meet certain criteria. Again, it depends on your offense. Not everybody qualifies for the elderly offender. You have to serve 2/3 of your sentence, and then you can go to home confinement. How that's operating right now when they're trying to move everybody to home confinement, I'm not exactly sure. My guess is if you meet the qualifications for elderly offender, they're going to get you out first, because that means you already have a home plan, you've served 2/3 of your sentence, and you haven't committed a violent offense, and you're otherwise low risk. Do either of you guys have any experience with that program, or have you heard how that's being implemented?
No, I don't.
Okay. I'm trying to see what else we have here. There's a bunch of questions, and I can't, let's see. Let's see. Oh, there's another question somebody has is, the 50% rule and the 25% if you're at that, they're wondering if that includes your good time. And I haven't heard the answer to that. And if you look at the memo, it says 25% of their sentence. But it does not say whether that includes, you know, the sentence that you're going to serve once you have your good time subtracted or not. My guess is that puts you close enough to the line that it won't matter. But I doubt you guys have heard that either, and it's not in the memo.
But I would still answer that question and say, once you receive that sentence, it's automatically computed at 85%. So you have a release date once you go into the institution. And if you serve, as they stated, 25 or 50% of that sentence that they're telling you that you actually have to serve, that should suffice, because you don't receive or go on with the same amount of time that you initially received from the judge. The Bureau of Prison computes it at 85%. You are able to lose your good time if you create some type of offense while you're incarcerated. So I would just say 25 or 50% of that 85% sentence.
Yeah, I would think that makes sense too. Let's see, people are asking about, when BOP talks about a minimum facility, what exactly does that mean? Is that only camps? Which one will exactly qualify for home confinement? Well, the minimum is camps. So there's minimum security is the camp, and then there's low, medium, high, and I don't know if USP is different or there's supermax or all the rest. The memo talks about if people, what kind of facility they're already in, reviewing the security level of the facility currently housing the inmate, with priority given to inmates residing in low and minimum security facilities. So that's both camps and then lows. Now, again, that's priority. And you're already starting to see that at Otisville and some of the other camps. That's where they're getting a lot of people out. But it doesn't preclude people from mediums. It's just, that's not where they are right now.
Yeah, Kevin, I would have to believe, as a matter of common sense, and not necessarily that they in the BOP use a lot of common sense, but I mean, as a matter of common sense, I think it's discretionary. I think it's going to be a discretionary issue. You may have somebody in a medium or a high that, you know, that fits the elderly or fits the compassionate, you know, is within a time span of getting out. You know, could be vulnerable. I think these are people they would look at as well.
Yeah, I think that's right. And this is the thing. I also think what happened at Oakdale and Oakton, and the reason these rules have been changing is because BOP, when they have a crisis at a facility and they realize that their existing rules don't allow a lot of people to benefit, they're trying to bend them. And so I do think if you're at a facility like Lompoc right now where it's getting hit, you know, I think there may be a little more flexibility in how they interpret who can get home confinement, just because the disease is spreading faster. So I think that's what's going to happen. There's people asking about compassionate release rules and whether they extend to somebody who has other issues like an eye disease, or somebody's losing their sight and not able to receive proper nutrition and treatment. You know, I think that's a tough call. I mean, I'm not going to speculate on who's going to get it, who's not going to get it. But if you look at BOP's general criteria for compassionate release, those are still going to apply. And so, you know, I don't know if that would satisfy them currently. COVID just adds another dimension. It puts certain people at risk of death. And so I think that's what's going to change it for some people. But some of these other things, I mean, if they didn't qualify before, COVID's not going to change that for them. Any thoughts on that, guys?
No, I think you're right. I think.
Okay. All right. I'm getting this question over and over again, and I know people keep having a question about it. People keep saying, do they have to serve 50%? The answer is no, you do not have to serve 50%. That is who they're going to give priority to. If you have served 50% or more, you are more likely to get approved for home confinement. You don't have to have served that. But again, if you have not served 50% and you don't have and you don't have a pressing need otherwise, for instance, your facility is under, the disease is spreading, or that you're older or vulnerable, it's going to make it harder to get it. So again, the 50% is not a hard and fast rule, but they are looking to clear people who are closer to the end of their sentence. So that's how you should view that. If your loved one has served about 20% of a 15-year sentence, I would say they have less of a chance of getting it unless they have other pre-existing conditions that make them vulnerable to COVID. So I hope I'm clear on that. I know we're gonna have to keep stressing that over and over again. It is not a hard and fast rule.
If I can jump in for
Yeah,
one
good.
second, just I think it's extremely important for the people watching this. You know, the only mechanism, and Kevin talked about this earlier, the only mechanism he has to figure out what's going on is for you to contact them and let them know. That's extremely, extremely important. And I'll tell you why. This virus spreads and spreads quickly. It's better for the BOP to be preemptive and proactive in doing whatever they can to save the people in there. You know, if I was the warden of a facility and I had a staff member, a couple staff members, and a few inmates that came down with the virus, I'm personally, me, I'd be looking to do everything physically possible to get as many people separated and out as I possibly could, because this thing is going to grow. There's no stopping it. So it's important for Kevin and fam to know what's going on, what you're hearing from the inside, your experiences, your other family members, friends. The more people that they can collect intelligence from, the better off it is, because they can be reaching out to the BOP, to justice, and to the White House if necessary. This is an issue that's close to the president, you know, and I think a lot of the stuff that's going on sort of contradicts what the president was trying to do in the First Step Act, with the First Step Act. So the more intel that fam can get, the better off they are, and that's really left up to the people watching this.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, Bernie, because that's how we find out what's going on. I mean, we started getting reports in the other day, and it turned into the night that people were getting pulled out of home confinement, including, I mean, getting pulled out of quarantine, and some people had showed up to pick up their loved ones and were being sent away without them and told that the rule had changed. And, you know, overnight we produced that letter and demanded answers on that and some other questions we have about some of the stuff that's going on. And it was because people were able to tell us, you know, those experiences. These are black boxes. People don't know what's going on in prisons. And also, if something that happens to you may not be, you know, it's a crisis to you, but it's not a issue of national policy concern. But when we hear from 10, 20, or 50 of you, then we know it's an issue worth raising. So we can't fix everything. And along those lines, somebody had asked about their loved ones have tried to apply for compassionate release, and you know, the bureau, the institution didn't take it, or said they didn't have time to process it and all the rest. And they want to know if that counts as a denial. I just want to say to folks, if you fill out the questionnaire on our webpage about wanting an attorney to help you on compassionate release, you have to document that. So if your loved one tries to get compassionate release to start that 30-day clock running, and yeah, there's the questionnaire. If you try to get that clock running and your loved one's counselor or unit manager will not take the application, you should send a letter from home saying that you're requesting compassionate release on their behalf. You're allowed to do that under the First Step Act's reforms to compassionate release, and document that so that once you send that letter and you have a copy of it, if you get an attorney at that point, if one of our pro bono attorneys is able to work on your case, let them know so that when they file in court, they'll say, this was the date we tried to make the Bureau aware of the request for compassionate release. It's been 30 days now. We didn't get an answer. And so that administrative remedy, we've exhausted the administrative remedy. I should mention, some people have asked about that. They've asked whether you have to wait 30 days, which is the law in normal times, whether you have to wait 30 days for the administrative remedy before you can file in court. And the answer is maybe. In some courts, the courts are determining that you know, the emergency allows for you to go right ahead and file. And other courts are saying, no, you got to wait for 30 days to expire before you can. So, you know, it just depends. There's no, again, it depends on the judge. It depends on the court. We're trying to get people to file as quickly as they can so that the judges are ready to rule of those on day 30. Let's see, what else do we have here? Oh, what if the institution has told the constituent services representative at the congressman's office that the institution does not have the, well, this is the same thing. Ruby, is there a way to scroll on these questions? Because I'm stuck on the same ones. And I don't know if you want to scroll up or something. But I think I've answered all of these. Yeah, so that's the thing. I would just say you have to get in touch with your representatives. That's the other thing. There's ways to do that on our webpage, is to, call your congressman and congresswoman, tell them that, the Bureau, you have a loved one in prison, that they need to weigh in with the BOP. We have actions for that on our website as well. Let me see. I don't know if we have any more questions. We may not. What other advice would you give to people who have loved ones? Matthew, what advice would you give to people who have loved ones in prison?
I would pretty much do as you have stated. They need to continue to look out, reach out and see what they can do on their behalf. At the same token, we know that whenever a person receives, like the question that you asked Bernard early on, and once we started the Facebook Live, you asked him, what about when people say that, well, they did the crime, let them do the time? But we understand that that person didn't receive a death sentence from the judge. And we know throughout their period of incarceration, they should be treated humanely. So I would just tell the family members that are out there asking these questions or wanting more information pertaining to their loved ones to try to ensure that your loved one is being treated humanely. And based on the amount of time that they've served, we know that anybody that served over 50% of their sentence that meets the criteria is going to be released. You've also stated that people that have less than 50% are going to be considered, but they just wanted a hard rule that 50% or more, they are, that meets criteria, we want to grant it to them. So I would say try to find out the percentage of the time that your loved one is served, so that whenever you have a conversation with somebody, whether it's somebody that's doing a compassionate release motion for them, you can be able to better assist them with it, because then they're going to know how to present it to the court. But at the same token, I would just say continue to pray for your loved ones. I'm a Christian believer, so I stress prayer instead of fear always. But at the same token, just continue to reach out and make sure, because as we stated, there needs to be some type of monitoring. And right now we need the families to actually do the monitoring.
Yes.
So we don't have a system in play for somebody that's in an organization or agency to be able to monitor the BOP. And I don't want to, cast all these dark clouds on BOP. They do several things right. But like I was just stating earlier in my conversation, more times than not, they make sure that whatever, I think Bernard, he kind of commented on something that I placed on Twitter. Oftentimes they watered it down, and I just was hitting with the soft version of normally watering down legislation or rules, and he just came straight out with the baseball bat and said, okay, no, they do this to it. But they do get some things right, but at this time we need to make sure, we need to be able to make sure that the families ensure that they get it right, because everyone wants to see their loved one come back home safe. And as I stated, even though they did the crime and they were given a percentage of time to serve, they weren't given a death sentence. And 95% of them are going to return to their community. And we pray that they all make it through this pandemic crisis.
Thank you. I want to repeat something because somebody's asked about it, about those who were approved to go to quarantine and then were pulled out. Will those people get released? I just want to reiterate that that is our understanding. That is the understanding of those who were in the meeting with the White House and the Justice Department, where they asked for this clarification that the 50% rule is, is not a hard and fast requirement, but is a guidepost. And so those who were cleared to go, and I don't know if that means everybody who was told they were eligible for home confinement. I don't believe that. I believe those who were sent to quarantine, who are on their way already, those people are supposed to get to the head of the line and be released. We're going to have to monitor that. And again, we're going to need your help for that. People asked about the ruling in Elkton, where the judge issued the order that basically demanded that the Bureau set criteria for people who are 65 and older and the rest to get them out of there. Basically said some of those conditions violated cruel and unusual. What did you think about that? Did either guys have thoughts about, having the court step in and tell the Bureau that if they can't get their act together, they're going to, which they didn't at Elkton, and they don't have a plan for releasing people in a quick way, that the court is going to order some people released. What did you think of that, Matthew?
When I read about it and actually seen the video of some of the things that were taking place, it was startling. By me actually being incarcerated at LCI Forest City at one time, I was also able to see the conditions there shown, and it was surprising and alarming as well. So by this judge actually ordering that department of that BOP to notify them of those things that you were just stating, we know that oftentimes, again, when I first heard it, it was like the judge was telling them to release people, and we know that the BOP oftentimes has a process that it goes through, because it can't just release people unless there's an order from a judge signed with that person's name on the that person's case number, reducing their sentence or suspending their sentence. So the fact that there needs to be a list of those vulnerable inmates, or I hate to say it, vulnerable prisoners, sent to the judge so that he can actually be able to see what the BOP is doing about it, I think it's good. But at the same token, I know that the Bureau of Prisons needs to be monitored. It is my hope that more federal judges, but we really don't need the federal judge. Well, we do in a sense. We just need the Department of Justice or the White House administration to put their foot down. And we know that they're able to, and we know that they did give some clarifications, as you stated earlier, what they meant by the 50%. And just tell the Bureau of Prisons, this is what I need for you to do, and see the Bureau of Prisons carry it out.
Yeah, Kevin, if I can.
Yeah.
Matthew, the one thing he said, somebody putting their foot down. One, I will say that I was pleased to see a federal judge get involved. Usually that's not the case. Number two, I think more federal judges should be looking at these complaints more seriously. When defendants come into court and say, this is the, where I am, this is what's going on where I am. A lot of times that stuff is just washed over. As far as somebody putting their foot down, I'll be the first one to say I ran the largest police department in the world, the NYPD. I had 55,000 people that worked for me. I ran Rikers Island for 6 years with 133,000 admissions per year. I will be the first one to say there is extreme mismanagement in the BOP. But there's a lot of good people that work there. They need real leadership. They need real direction. They need a different culture. That's what they need more than anything else. They need somebody present day, 21st century, come in and look at the department through a different scope and start to make changes that would benefit the department, benefit the prisoners, and benefit the staff as far as safety and resources and training and things like that. So
well, I don't know if you saw this, but the Council of Prison Locals, which is the union for the corrections officers, filed a national grievance and said that they're not being protected either by BOP's rules. And so
they should be screaming bloody murder.
Yeah.
And I put something out last week about this. Correction officers, look, I run these agencies, but correction officers, more than anybody else, they should have all the protective gear they need, because they're not only jeopardizing them and the people in their charge, they're jeopardizing their families. These people go home at night, they got wives and kids and all the husbands, whatever. You know what? They should be taken care of by the department, and it's not happening. So yeah. I don't blame the unions. I think the unions should be screaming bloody murder. It's only going to benefit them as well as the inmate population they're in charge of looking at, taking care of.
I'm gonna ask one quick one. People ask, because risk assessment is part of the criteria, and people are asking, pattern was the thing that was developed to judge risk assessment, and people are asking how they can get their pattern score. The truth is, I know the answer to that. I've been asked before. I would have thought that the people in prison would get their pattern score, because their pattern score is what's going to determine where they rank in order to get these earned time credits under the First Step Act. So everybody in prison has been analyzed to get a pattern score to decide whether they're going to get credit for taking certain recidivism reducing classes. I would have thought the people inside would be able to get their pattern score. People are asking, and I think suggesting that they're not. Have you guys heard anything about that? But my guess is that in a normal circumstance, you can get your pattern score, but right now it's hard, because these counselors and unit managers, some of them aren't showing up for work or doing anything.
You know what, Matthew may have gotten something more recent. As of about 3 or 4 months ago, and this was before the pandemic, I've heard from a number of people that they could not get them.
Yeah.
There was, it wasn't working, that the BOP wasn't following the guidelines of the First Step Act and some of the things that were implemented. So I don't know, obviously that's probably hasn't changed in 3 months, given that we're in this pandemic, but that's something I think when you think of leadership within the BOP, there's a bunch of stuff in the First Step Act that should have been, that thing's 16 months old already, or whatever it is. This stuff should have been implemented already. And I think they have to do a better job of getting there.
I want to take a minute, because a lot of the questions keep going to an issue that we have we've had to address over and over again. And I understand, because new people come in and people first hearing about FAM, and then they're asking us this question. And I really would urge you, go to our webpage and check out this document that we have that's called Understanding the Difference Between Home Confinement, Clemency, and Compassionate Release. Those are 3 different programs or mechanisms to get early release. But the one thing that's really important to understand is that home confinement is a determination by the Bureau of Prisons, and FAM can really do nothing to help you. We have said this a number of times. I don't recommend hiring an attorney to try to get home confinement either, because they have this memo from the Justice Department they're going to try to use to interpret, to decide what priority to release people. And they're going to know that. Now, they have said you don't need to apply for it. There's no form. But if you feel like you meet the criteria and your counselor or unit manager hasn't asked you, I mean, feel free to say, please tell me why I don't fit the criteria, all the rest. But for the family members, there's really nothing to apply for, and there's nothing that we can do to help push that along. I mean, we can push to expand the criteria, and I think we may do that, because I think some of these criteria don't make sense. But in terms of the individual assessment that's done of your loved one, there's nothing we can do for that. So that's home confinement, a total BOP process, nothing we can do. And you should request that, even though they tell you don't have to. On compassionate release, that only happens, I'm afraid right now, is if you request it. The BOP has the authority to grab your loved one and bring that motion on their behalf, but they're not doing it. So that's the one that FAM is working on with NACDL, Washington Lawyers Committee, this big compassionate release project, the pro bono attorneys they're helping us with. That is one where you have to request it internally. You have to ask, and if they don't, then this is when we want, if they don't accept your request, family members should write a letter to the warden and document that. And then you have to go to our webpage, fill out our questionnaire that Alexis showed you, go to fam.org. We have an online questionnaire. When you fill that out, we will try to match you with one of these volunteer attorneys. If you have your own attorney, go ahead and pursue it that way. That's fine. But compassion release is different. The criteria are different. You need a judge to sign off on it. And when you get compassion release, if you get it, that shortens your sentence. Home confinement just allows you to serve the rest of your sentence at home in a different setting. The Bureau may start sending people to halfway houses and do that to clear out the prisons. That still means you're under BOP custody though. Compassionate release means because of an extraordinary and compelling change in circumstances, because of your sentence, because you're older, you're ill, you're susceptible to COVID, all of these factors, that they will shorten your sentence. And that a judge has to do. So it's a totally different process. One we can help with, and we're trying to as many people as we can. Another one, home confinement, is one that the Bureau of Prisons is leading, and they're directing, and they're deciding who's eligible. So I want to be really clear on that, because I know people have questions, different criteria and different outcomes and everything, different process. Does a federal judge have the power to give a person a furlough if they felt that compassionate release isn't appropriate? No, I don't believe that's possible. The judge can only change your sentence. I believe that's the case. They can't change your custody, I don't believe. I shouldn't say anything that I don't know, but a furlough, certainly not, because a furlough is the power of the warden to grant. It's the Bureau of Prisons to give furloughs. It's not, it's not a judicial remedy, as far as I know. If they want to clear them out, they'd have to use something different. Yeah, go ahead.
Whenever you started giving them the definitions of home confinement and compassionate release, but you had also stated clemency, but you failed to state what you meant by clemency, even though for the Federal Bureau of Prisons, we know that that comes directly from the president. But at the same token, for the states, it will come from their governors or their boards that they have in place for that. So I just want to express to them about the clemency as well.
Yeah, thank you. And I don't always go explain it because I don't see that as a viable remedy right now because, people wait in line for years and years. And so this is not a time, but if you go to our webpage, you'll see, at the federal level, you apply to the Office of Pardon Attorney. There's a form you have to fill out. It's just not going to be a quick remedy. I want to address something else. We get a lot of questions about what's going on in the states. And whenever I say that, I say to people, which state? Because there's 50 different states, the District of Columbia, there's different rules, different processes, different governors, different actors. And so different things are happening at the state level. People say, well, what about compassionate release at the state level? If you go to our website, look up a report that our general counsel, Mary Price, wrote called Everywhere and Nowhere. It is an analysis of the 50 different states' compassionate release programs. It's usually called medical parole or elderly parole or geriatric parole, different things. No state has what the federal government has, which is the ability to appeal denials or non-answers in court. And a lot of these programs at the state level are very narrow in terms of the qualifications. You have to be within a few months of death. So those systems are not the same as the federal one. And so they have not, if you've seen in a lot of the states, that's not what they've been able to use. In Pennsylvania, the governor used his power to grant reprieves. In other states, they've used other authorities because a lot of the states don't have very, very robust programs to grant compassionate release. So we're doing the federal one because that's one where with an attorney, if you can get to court, you have a chance. But every state is different. I encourage you to review that report. At the end of the report, there's 50 memos for the different states that tells you what the eligibility requirements are and what the process is. One thing that's going to come out of this whole disaster is when this ends, we're going to have to go to these states and get more authorities built in for them to respond, because the Department of Corrections at the state level don't always have furlough authority. They don't have compassionate release authority. And so they are not able to do the things that the federal government is doing right now. One thing they do have authority in a lot of states is the governor could be doing more, and they're not. So we're going to finish up. I want to ask you guys to leave, give us a final thought or wish for folks, and then I'll close up. Matthew, why don't you go first?
I would say as we go through this pandemic, for those that are incarcerated, be mindful that there are several organizations as well as family members and friends. And I would also say, whether it's on a state level or a national level, we know that the White House administration is also concerned about the safety of those that are behind bars. So just continue to pray, and hopefully we can move through this thing safely and faster than what we're doing. The goal has always been to reduce the numbers of mass incarceration, but now more so that this pandemic is taking place. So just continue to pray that that will happen. Be mindful that there are people that are also praying and looking. We know that a person who does the time does have to do the crime. Does the crime, does have to do the time, but we know they have to do it also in a safe environment so they can come back home to their family and loved ones. Also, as you stated, Kevin, we got to start making sure that with some of those individual states, to my knowledge, the state of Ohio was looking at doing some medical releases, but has suspended it. Nothing ever, went on through the legislation, and then this pandemic hit, and then the governor had to do something differently because they have no, rules or guidelines to go by. So a lot of states got to get better overall on criminal justice reform, not just criminal justice reform, but the needs of those that are incarcerated.
Thanks. Bernie?
Yeah, I just, I want to tell your viewers, there's unity in numbers. The more of you, the more of your family members, the more of your friends that can get to your legislators, to get to Kevin and fam, and let them know what's going on. Tell them what the real insight is. That's probably more important right now than anything else, because these guys can't act. Kevin can't do what he has to do if he doesn't know what's going on. So it's extremely important for the people watching, talk to the people on the inside, talk to your friends, anybody that's talking to them. Keep in mind, it's yourself, your family. If you have 10 people in your family that's calling your legislator, wanting to know why this is happening, why this hasn't happened. The BOP is supposed to do this, they're not doing it. What are you doing about it? And then get that intel back to Kevin and fam. You all be a lot better off. And I only wish that this thing ends a lot quicker than it looks like it's going to for the safety and security of everyone.
Well, I want to thank you guys both, and especially Bernie. Again, condolences on your loss of your mother, and appreciate you still coming today. And when I asked you, I said, "Do you want to pass?" And you said, "No, this is too important." And so I'm really grateful for you. I'm grateful for the letter you sent to the White House, using your clout to ask the president and this administration to use compassionate release, because that's an important tool. I want to tell people we get a lot of requests for us to do things, and as Bernie said, the best thing that we can do is encourage you to do something. Is you have to get involved. I mean, we can write letters, we can direct your advocacy, but we cannot be strong without you all taking action and calling your members. The quickest thing to do, I would say once more time, is text FAM, F-A-M-M, to 21333. Get in the system, start following us on Facebook and Twitter. If you're not on Twitter, get on Twitter, because that's where reporters and politicians are. And start following FAM and following Matthew and Bernie and me. And I just want to say, again, this is an incredibly stressful time. And there's a lot you can do for your loved one. There are calls you can make. There's protests you can attend. There's emails you can send. Heather from our office just started. We got a campaign going directed at the Justice Department because of this whole debacle. Our mantra is going to be keep them safe or send them home. So look for that on all the social media platforms, because you can take action and leave a call. I know people want to feel useful, and it's a time where we feel helpless, both in our personal lives, because there's not much we can do, and because when we have loved ones in prison and we know how desperate the situation is. But I'm going to keep urging you, and I do this every time we talk, which is take as many actions as you can, but call it a day at some point, and let yourself, give yourself a break, because you have a lot of time on your hands and you could worry yourself to death, and you'll be no good to anyone if you do that. Your loved ones inside, the three of us have been inside prison. There were times where we felt low. The last thing we wanted was the people on the outside worrying about us too much, because we already felt bad that there were people outside worrying about us. And so just know that they're doing the best they can. You do the best you can. Like I said, take as many actions a day as you can, but at some point put it down, take a walk, get some air, take care of yourselves. I really mean that, because you'll be a better advocate and a better parent and friend and neighbor if you do that. So thanks very much for joining us. I want to thank Matthew and Bertie again. Please join us at all the FAM social platforms, get involved, and we are going to fight this until we get your loved ones home or safe. So thanks very much, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Thanks.